you're going to know as an artist, when you're producing something or when you finish something, you're going to know if you think it's good and if you like it, and you will feel some kind of affinity to it because it's a part of you, and you're being authentic to yourself in producing that work.
Welcome to the Flying Fruitball, a platform dedicated to the discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. I'm your host, RNS, and in today's episode, I have the chance to talk to Anil Mistry, a mixed media artist I met at the Other Art Fair in London earlier this year. Exploring the landscape through his art, Anil often mixes the bold, solid concrete structures of London with the soft, sun-soaked land of the American West Coast. I had a great time talking to Anil about his work, and I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation too. Righty-o. So I'm going to start where I start with absolutely everybody, which is just tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
Okay. So without doing too much backstory, as a kid, I was always drawing. I was always, my dad used to bring home these reams of computer paper that I would always be sketching and drawing. And then I suppose in my kind of teens, I kind of developed my kind of love of kind of I got into the more kind of graphic side of things. So you probably see that in my work. A lot of photography. I was fascinated by all kind of relevant medias that I felt like I could pick up and do. Very much inspired by music, as I know a lot of artists are. So in those days, without giving away my age, album covers, I was fascinated by the designs, whether it would be like the edginess and the hard graphics of, say, like a Duran Duran album cover, versus like there's hardcore punk bands like Dead Kennedys, where it was all very much collage work. I was just alongside the music, it was seeing these visuals, and while listening, I'm looking at these things going, and you can see how they're all related. So that kind of really embedded that desire to be not only wanting to be a musician at the time, but also to create as much as I could. And then I suppose with what I started creating, my way of expressing that, I started playing in bands as a drummer. I used to do all the artwork. I used to do all the flyers. And at that point, I suppose we're talking late 80s, early 90s, the way I would make these things was either sketching, finding imagery, cutting out, going to the library, going to photocopier machine with my 10p's to enlarge things, shrink things, stick it on, recopy it, and do it like that.
Wow, like very analog.
Yeah, very analog, because it was like, I was sitting there in my bedroom going, well, I know what I want to do. I've got no tools, and I don't know what's the best way to start. You don't learn this stuff at school either.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like going, okay, well, what can I do? Yes, as a photocopier, I've got £1, I've got £1, and I've got 10 pieces. Can I do it within my budget? And so that's really how I got started. I mean, I did, like an art GCSE. I think I got a grade B, but then moved more into, I did a degree, which was quite an interesting one, where it basically covered everything that I liked. So it was pioneering in kind of digital softwares like Photoshop. It had photography element, had a film element, had a graphic design element. And yeah, from there it's, I started my career as a graphic designer, and I kind of, throughout my career, I got more into the more management thing. And about 10 years ago, I was like, hang on, there's something missing in my life. So that's when I decided to go back to the art side of things. I don't know, I went off on one there, but that's kind of how
that's super interesting. But like the cool thing about that is that all of these different influences, like photography, graphic design, they play heavily into your work now. That's the great thing. Exactly. It's like the influences that you were influenced by, from the start, are still there now. And I think that's what makes your work very interesting. As I said to you when I saw you in the art fair, you are definitely one of the favorite people I saw there. I think your work is very much speaks to me. It's just something so fascinating about it. And getting to see in person is also extremely cool as well. It's a privilege because we don't always get to see work in person. So it was definitely cool.
I'm glad you liked it. Yeah. So, I mean, just following on from that. So, because I'm into all of those things, when I started making art about art and starting to consider myself as an artist about 10 years ago, it was very much like, well, I started with just paints. I started with just acrylics. It was actually quite an interesting story because my wife had 10 years before that had bought me an art set, one of those beginning things, with a few canvases, some acrylic paints and a stand. And we moved houses, and it was literally just stayed in the box. I moved from place to place, didn't touch it. And now I remember very clearly, it was about 10 years ago, and I just suddenly had this thing of going, well, I need to create. I'm feeling very much unfulfilled. Had minor success as a musician, where you're in a band, you're very much relying on your bandmates around you. You don't necessarily have the control. And I was in a bit of a funk basically. And I picked up this. I got this art set. I opened it and I thought, right, I'm going to do this. And it was one of those pivotal moments in my life, and I still refer back to it, where I was just like, I had this idea of creating just like an abstract with some various paints and textures. And after I did that first one, like, I had this weird, everything kind of sparked in my brain. I suddenly thought, one, I can probably do this with some practice and I'm enjoying it. Two, it's just reliant on myself. I don't have to be dependent on anybody. All of these social media tools that I'd been using, I suddenly thought, well, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. Everything kind of clicked in one moment. So that's when I kind of started creating. But then I started thinking about it, and all my old references came back. So it was like, hang on, I don't want to just do paint. I see all these other things. I want to incorporate everything that I used to love in what I do. And that's why I try and do everything in everything that I do.
Like, how interesting is it though that you chose art to be kind of like the creative outlet that would give you that, kind of just the feeling of, of kind of purpose, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, totally. And it filled a massive gap for me. I thought about, continuing on the digital side of things, but I was spending all my time on computers, so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something physical, practical. I wanted an end thing that I could pick up and hold.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that we don't even think about that often in terms of art. Is that, like, for the most part, art is a physical object, and that you have to actually be present to create it. You don't have to be online. You don't have to be staring at a screen. It's actually it takes you away from the online world, which is kind of good in this society because we're always online. So I think that's actually a very valuable bonus for artists, I think.
And it reopened my eyes a little bit to, so cliched, and I know everyone probably says these things, but once I got into that headspace and just kind of walking about and just thinking about things and seeing, almost like opening your eyes and looking outside and going, hang on, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. All of the things I ignored suddenly became relevant to me. And it really influenced my work. And I think it's, I know a lot of artists would say the same thing, but that whole moment, it filled a gap. I felt it filled a gap in my life.
That's super cool. I think it's definitely something a lot of people say, but it's also because, like, as an artist, you have a very different perspective on the world because you see the world as like a playground as opposed to just everyday life. And I think that's really kind of the way people look at things because, there's a few artists who I am good friends with. Like, there's an artist called Laurie Bennett Levy who will walk around New York and look at like the textures on the pavement or the textures around her and then use them in her work. And it's like, art's very observational. I think when you become an artist, you become an observer. I think that's really kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar in a similar vein with a lot of my work, it's an interpretation. I don't like to just, I start my work usually with some form of photography and my own photography. I would say 99% of the time. And that is based on me walking around and seeing things. I've been lucky enough to travel a little bit as well, and using those moments to take time out to just walk the streets and take pictures and build a catalogue of imagery with the knowledge that at some point in the future, I will do something.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, and that, it's observing whether it's whether it's a very famous building or piece of architecture, or what I like to call kind of like the street furniture that you just walk past every day and ignore. And sometimes if you're in that right kind of mindset, you can see an amount, you can see some beauty in something or an angle in something. So I just take the pictures and I think, well, maybe I can use that going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super cool though, because the thing is that I don't think you would ever really know what you're going to create until you sit down and create it. I mean, I don't know how much improvisation you do, and it's definitely something we'll definitely touch upon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a great thing, is at least you have the resources to draw upon, because the last thing you want to do is go to create and be like, I don't know what I'm going to create. At least you've got imagery that you can start off with. You can be like, oh, this is interesting. Or like combine random images together and be like, okay, what can I do with these? And you give yourself options, and that is really the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's trying to reduce those times that you're stuck, because that happens, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So what is the biggest challenge of being an artist?
A few things. There are a few things. I suppose it's this. Right, where to start? So the self-doubt. I think there's times where I know for someone like me, and being an artist, and over the last 10 years, I realized I learned a lot about myself. It's there's a little bit of, I suppose, wanting recognition, being recognized, whether it's positive feedback, whether it's negative feedback. I think a lot of artists need some validation. And when you're isolated and you're working and you're in the process, often it's that, is this any good? Is this any good? And it's that battling that kind of self-doubt. Will other people like it? And then when I talk about that, people goes, well, if you like it, it should be good. And I'm going, yeah, but do I like it? And it's that that is definitely one of the harder bits. But I actually like that mental challenge. I'm learning to like that mental challenge. Learning to know when to stop, when to pause, when to leave it and come back to it. So there's that. And I suppose the other side is the financial aspect, because, amongst me and my peers in this space, I know that you have a lot of artists who want that recognition. They want to make a livelihood out of it. And it's balancing that with the realities of, I need to make this work. I need to live. I may have families, or how can I make that balance? Trying to fulfill my ambition in this space, which is super competitive. How do you stand out? How do you get the right awareness of what you're doing? Again, marketing is a huge challenge. And how do you balance all of those things? They're the challenges.
So there's a lot of challenges. That's why I like asking that question. And I'm positive I asked you when I saw you, because I asked every artist in the art fair that question. It's my go-to question to ask any artist anytime I meet anybody, because it's a great question to start off with. It's a perfect icebreaker. I'd advise anybody to use that question because it's great. But I think also another challenge would be the idea of not losing your own sense of self in your work for money. Because I think that's also a huge factor, because, we all want to make stuff that's commercial, but you also want to make stuff that you're actually happy with,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the other one is, it's that constant battle of, it's exactly that. If I don't make something that's true to myself, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, it's like, well, is what I'm creating commercial? And you can, and actually on the positive side, I've had a lot of battles with that, but I think if you feel confident in your work and you're proud of what you've done and it feels authentic to you, I'm confident that there is an audience out there who are going to like what you do, but you have to find them and they have to find you.
That is very, very good advice, I must say, because I think we kind of expect to put our work online on social media and people just find it and love it. And it's not that at all. You have to build up a reputation. You have to build up an identity. You have to be personal. You have to make people understand you as a person, and then they'll understand your art, because they don't understand you as an artist. They're not going to understand the art necessarily. It's a question that I've got on this list from the very bottom. And it's something that I spoke to a good friend called Ryan Dean Haas about. He's going to be annoyed because I mention him in every interview.
Okay.
And it's the idea of like the skill or the personality artist, like which is more important, which is going to get you more kind of a better audience, I guess, a more engaged audience, because we're after engagement. We're not after people just telling us you like it. You're after actually people buying it, So like, actually, I guess the question I must ask you now, completely out of order, which is perfect, is, which is more important, the skill of the artist or the personality of the artist?
I'm gonna reluctantly say both. I think I say reluctantly because you want everyone just to love your work irrespective of who you are.
Yeah.
But reality is if you don't put yourself out there, if you don't, it comes into a bit of selling. If you can't sell your own work, if you can't enthuse somebody about your work, whether it's in person, whether it's on social media, it's going to make it harder for you. And I think for someone like me, I'm definitely better at doing it in person than on social media. The thought of creating a video and going, hey, look what I'm doing today. Look at this, and this great, which a lot of people do, and it works. No matter how super cheesy you may think it is, or how awkward you feel, it works because people who are interested just want to know that little bit more, and it's the quickest way of doing it. I've seen, and I think at art fairs as well. I've only done a few, and I'm planning to do lots more. And I think it's for me, I think it's the best way for me to show off my art, actually, because you can see a lot more in person. It's about being approachable, and it's about, it sounds terrible, but it's how you stand, it's how you smile, and it's tiring and it's hard. And I think people can warm to you by your persona and your presence, and then you can help convince them to buy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's kind of interesting though, because I think I've got two thoughts. I can go either direction with this, but it's interesting. So a lot of people I talk to are introverts, and I kind of wonder, like, is the idea of being an introvert or kind of more introverted play like a role in the way artists are comfortable or not comfortable presenting themselves?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, many artists are introverted because art becomes their way of expressing themselves, and then the realities of the situation come in because they're going, well, I can't sell any of this stuff. Well, you're going to have to either be represented by a gallery who's going to do that on your behalf and take half of your money, or you're going to have to step up. And it's tough. We were talking about challenges earlier, but this is a big challenge. I think it can stop success.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It certainly can. Yeah, I know a lot of really great people who could be really, really successful, but they're kind of holding themselves back unknowingly. So like, yeah, absolutely. Like 100%. I think it's easy for me to say, but I'm actually quite introverted in real life. Like I don't really talk to a lot of people all the time, but online I talk to loads of people all the time. Being online is easier in some ways, but it's also a lot harder. So I think introverted artists just kind of have to kind of figure out how they're going to navigate this space, because it's important that they, get the chance to, have the same opportunities as everybody else.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, and you're right. There'll be so many people who've got great work, and then if they can't sell it, or if they don't have if they don't have the financial means to promote as well, I think I rely a lot on Instagram, but if I actually sat down and analyzed how many sales do I get from that directly, very minimal. Yeah. It's just a layer in the overall presence of what I think you have to do as an artist.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would definitely want to touch on at some point for sure, because I think, the whole idea of like, we rely on things like Instagram, but we don't think that's not the only option. That's not kind of the main selling point of anybody's career. It's not Instagram. It's just one rung in the ladder. It's probably the best way to put it.
It's true. And there's a bit of a harsh reality around that too, because you think, great, I'm on Instagram, it's visual, it's great. It's one tiny bit.
So anyway, getting back to the actual question. So can anybody be an artist?
Yeah, I think ultimately, if you're willing to put the time in, and if you're dedicated, and if you feel passionate, and you feel authentic about what you're doing, yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not, because you could say the same about me, and you could say the same about so many other people doing the same as what I'm doing. They weren't, and they became. So yeah.
I like that. That's actually a really good way of looking at it, actually. That's a very good way of looking at it. And it's interesting how people have had like whole careers and whole lives, and then they're like, okay, cool. Now I'm in like maybe this particular part of my life. I'm like, okay, cool. This phase of my life, like, oh, I want to create something. And it's weird how we always go back to the need to create something. Like that's really interesting. Like there are people who watch Netflix, and there are people who create. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's just really interesting. Like where does that desire to create come from?
Yeah, I don't know. And I think that is really down to personalities. You know, there's like, it's the Netflix example is great. It's like, you know, this is not me, by the way, but a friend of mine was talking about online dating. The number of profiles where, I mean, like the vast majority were, what do you love doing? Cozying up on the sofa, getting a glass of wine and watching Netflix. I mean, that is just, if that's your best selling point, there's a problem. And so that's why I think there are people who are wanting to go out there, or they have this innate desire to go, I want to make something, I want to do something. And there's people who are consumers. And I think that's just what it is.
The creators and the consumers. Yeah, I like that. That's so cool. I'm going to absolutely be thinking about that for the rest of the day now. That's really interesting. So actually, let's get into your work. So how would you describe your work for those who may not have seen it?
It's mixed media. At a base level, it's mixed media collage, where I start with photographic images. I create mock-ups digitally, actually, because it just works for me in terms of speed and time. I take bits. It's not just finding one image and then creating a piece of artwork. I could have multiple images where I'm stitching things together roughly. I come up with rough color schemes. I like to spray paint. I like to use acrylic paints to layer up. I like to use graph papers. One thing I'm looking at, I know it's been done a million times, but it's using billboard papers. All of these things just to add different colors, different textures. Although the work is still relatively flat, I still like to have subtle layers in there, brush stroke textures as well. And I like to bring all of these elements together to create what's typically been a new landscape, where I might position buildings together, almost to create a kind of new environment to tell a new story. And on top of that, I have a layer of screen printing, usually one or only two layers, just to add an extra layer of annoyance and complexity for me. But it's, to have that half tone effect, rather than, I didn't want it to just be plain collage. I felt like I had to find my own angle, and that's part of my angle, and it makes it expensive and annoying for me to finish things. But I couldn't compromise on that, if you see what I mean. I have to tick all the boxes to make it the right piece of work for me.
I think that's really interesting, because I feel like it adds more depth to your work. Like, even though your work is flat, there's a lot of depth to it. And I think that's the fascinating thing. Like, for me, I think what I like about your work is like, it's very eclectic. It's not standard. It's not, you're not doing like the certain thing every single time. It's I can just kind of tell you're having fun with it. You're taking it seriously, but it's like, it's fun. It's a process. It's something you enjoy doing. It's a lot of thought and consideration gone into it, even if it looks chaotic. I think that's what's really cool about it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of thought. And, there is definitely the 3 a.m. wake up where my brain will just be filled with, how am I actually going to make this? Because I've got this thing in my head, and how am I going to make this? And I will go through that process. And by the time I wake up in the morning, I realized my solution at 3 a.m. is never going to work, but it's part of the process. And I think, and this is another, actually, you touch on a point, the eclectic nature, I've always been very conscious of, because a lot of the advice that you get in this space, and I've done many chats, I've got many artist friends, I've taken advice from a lot of people. It's about finding your niche, making it, and that's what you do. And for me, I was really, really upset because I heard that from a lot of people. And for me, that's the I'm not sure what the right word was. That's the opposite of what art is for me, because otherwise it becomes like a job.
Yeah.
I know that I want art is to be my primary career, and I'm taking my steps towards doing that. But then if I'm just having to churn out the same old thing within the same restrictions, that's not art for me. That's just finding a channel and you've got your groove and that's what you do. I think you have to progress as an artist. So if I look back at what I've done over for the last 10 years, and specifically maybe more the last 5 years, I think there is a progression in what I've done. I've evolved what I've done. I will do typically 12 to 18 pieces of work a year. I'm trying to increase that as time goes on. And each time it takes on a level. You can't, I would say that there is progression within my work. But I don't ever want to just do the same thing. I think people who look at my work closely will see that progression over time, because that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because you're not a factory, you're an artist. And
Exactly.
I think that's the thing that people sometimes often forget. Like, obviously you want to commercialize your work, and making money, of course, is it's like what everybody wants to do, but you have to find a compromise where you're creating stuff that you're happy with, that you want, and that, that is true to you. Because yes, commercialization is great and people are making money off your work is great, but there's a very fine line between being an artist and a brand, and kind of the whole idea of being a business, because obviously you're a business, but I don't know, there's an interestingly fine line between doing stuff you like because you like it and doing stuff for profit. And I think you have to find the balance between the two. It's very important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's I follow a lot of artists and they've got their thing and they've got their style, but I would say everyone is steadily always progressing. And I think that's important. And going back to what I said earlier, if you've got an audience, and I strongly believe that every artist will find their audience. It might be a lot of work, but they will find their audience. I strongly believe that if that happens, then as long as you suddenly don't entirely switch and start doing portraits, in my example, that would be a weird thing for me right now. But if you can see that progression, I think your fans will follow you.
But I also think like it's your prerogative to do so. If you want to change and do portraits, it's your prerogative. You shouldn't. Yeah. I think artists should never feel like pressure to stick with doing one thing, because the worst thing you could do is create work you don't like.
Yeah.
Whether you're being paid for it or not. Because at the end of the day, like as a person, you go through different phases in life. The things you're interested in now are not going to be what you're interested in 3 years' time. And you should, your work should reflect yourself. It is a reflection of yourself, essentially. So I think, even if people wanted to pivot and do something different, look at musicians who do albums where like each album is completely different. It's because they're at different points in their life. And yes, fans will follow, people won't follow, but that's just the nature. I think we forget, someone's not going to stick around forever. It doesn't work like that. There's not, the 1,000 people that are following you are not going to be there in 3 years' time. It goes up and down. More people will follow, less people will follow. People fall off. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, it's just, and it's a good point. And I suppose I would qualify that by going, well, yeah, if I did want to do portraits, I'd probably do it. It'll be an evolvement of the style that I already do. And I'm actually now thinking, how could I do that?
Well, for you, it would be quite easy, because all you do is just add more people to your work and then gradually go from there.
Yeah.
That's the way you would do it. That's what I would imagine you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose taking that point a bit further into the context of what I'm doing, I mentioned like I'm doing a lot of landscapes, but in the last year I've been going, actually, there are so many things close up. There's so many elements close up that actually, if you just kind of isolate that down, it can have the same effect. So that's something that I'm exploring at the moment by, finding a single object and just going, actually, I'm just going to make a piece on that single object. For me, and that's, it gives me an extra string to my bow, because I can still do it in the same style. And it still, I think, evokes that same feel. But it doesn't restrict me from just going, well, I need to make sure I've got the buildings and the people and the bits here and, and the palm trees, etc.
Yeah, because now you just said that just made me think. I think the problem is that we feel like, or we forget that style and subject matter are two different things. the subject you're exploring is not the same as the style you're using. And I think if you find a style you like and a style you're comfortable with, any subject matter you can be creative with that. It's just how you kind of approach that. And I think we confuse that. And I just said, I'm like, that's really a good point. Because I think, we forget that, yes, you're right. You can create portraits tomorrow in your style and it will still be cool. People will notice your work. It's about creating some kind of recognition for who you are and how, and your work. Like seeing an image of me like, oh, that's, your work specifically. So, I don't know. That's a really good thought I've just thought about. I'm going to ask that question next time.
I suppose the style becomes part of your brand as well, because I think on that kind of business side of things, I was conscious of everything that I'm doing to have that sense of evolving from the last set of work, because I think, but also being familiar, because it does become part of your identity, and you want that recognition with everything that's out there. The best thing was for someone to go, oh, is that like Anil Mistry's work there? Because it's got that similar thing. And they go, oh, it is him. You might have your branding, you might have your mark, but it has to come out through the work as well.
Especially like on Instagram or social media where people won't see your name and they won't actually see any context for it. They'll just see the image. You want to make sure that people actually be like, that's exactly his work, or that's this person's work, and it's a great way to kind of put your mark on your image. And there are people who do that very successfully.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I often get people go, oh, your work reminds me of X and Y. And I was like, yeah, okay, I can see that, but that's not what I want to do.
That's not what I wanted to say.
I don't want you to say that. But then I think, again, that it just takes time. It takes time to develop your presence and develop your style and get your style known.
Actually, that leads me on to a question that is, again, right at the very bottom of this list.
Okay.
From a very good artist friend of mine called Riona Othello, whose work is gorgeous. And her question was like, do you like being compared to people?
Yes and no. Firstly, no, because of what I've just said. Because, there is that mild arrogance of wanting to be super original, but in reality, everything's been done in one shape, form or another. Yes, but then yes, of course, because if you're being compared to successful artists, then it makes you feel like you're doing something right, and then there's hope and there's potential.
Yeah, because I think a lot of artists are polarized on that question, because it's like some people love it because you're, as you said, if you're being compared to somebody who's great, that's a compliment. But then, you don't want to be devalued just at the base level of, oh, your work looks like somebody else's. You want people to actually see what you're actually doing that's different from the other person.
Exactly.
Because, it's always saying your work has elements of somebody else, which is cool, but like realistically, your work is not theirs. So, you have to find what's original about this piece of art in front of you. I don't know. I always wonder, because I'm like, because I have a habit of sending people, and I'll do it to you actually. I've got a few ideas already.
Okay. Yeah.
I always send people other artists' work and be like, oh, I think you might like this. And then I always think, am I helping them by doing this, or am I just making them feel worse? Because I'm just like, should probably stop doing this. But if you want me to, I'm happy to send you some cool suggestions.
Yeah. No, please send it through. I'm always
doing that.
There's always, that level of discovery. If someone's recommending something, that's cool.
Why are landscapes so important in art, and what do you think we can learn by studying the environment?
Okay. I don't know. That's a good question. With landscapes, I suppose what is appealing for me, I don't know, it's that thought of, seeing what's on the horizon. I suppose it's that thing of, look, when you're pondering, when you're looking out and you're considering life, you do often look off into the distance. I always have this thing of like, I grew up near Brighton, so there was always this moment where you're sitting on the beach and you're looking out to the sea. And again, it's not necessarily a landscape, but it's those moments of reflection. And I think that's why landscapes feature a lot in art, because it's almost like you're looking out. It's a way of looking forward. You appreciate what's in front of you. And I think when you're paying attention to a landscape, you're in that mindset of being reflective. I mean, if I was just having to rush and walk to the station or go about and do my business, then you're too wrapped up. But that act of looking out and just going, lets you stop and think. I think that's probably why landscapes get there is a lot of landscape in art generally, because it's that moment to stop and reflect and look and appreciate. And I think I think that's why I probably like to do that work. And I think I remember when we were talking before, it's I'm trying to mix things up a little bit by going, yes, the landscapes and the buildings, and building these collages of environments that may not exist, but could exist in a kind of sideways fantasy, not even fantasy, but a sideways view of the world. I'm also trying to, look a little bit closer at objects themselves, and to see if can I make something out of those too. And it's usually the objects, and for the landscapes, it's the buildings that we typically, you typically take for granted or walk past, or just furniture from everyday life that is just there, but actually there can be an inherent beauty in those things.
It's very observational then, isn't it? It's like you're trying to redefine the everyday, kind of make people stop and actually appreciate what's around them, as opposed to just walk past it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's a mindset thing, 100% a mindset thing. So I remember speaking to someone once. I remember I was having some, there was some issues going on in my life, and you become very kind of like inside yourself. And someone was telling me about, well, actually, this is a period of your life, that doesn't matter, but there's a period of, it's when you actually start looking up and you start appreciating the things around you. It could be the flowers that you see sprouting in spring, and the colors suddenly seem so vibrant, and you come out of yourself a bit, and you start appreciating the world around you. And that was actually a pivotal thing. And I think that I remember someone saying this, and actually, literally a few months later, taking that on board. And I think that helped me look up a bit more, look out a bit more.
See, that's interesting how art can do that, how art can be kind of like an escapism for people, or kind of a way to process their inner emotions. I think that's really cool. Yeah. But actually, I wanted to ask you as well, like, how did the pandemic affect your work?
The pandemic was interesting. I obviously, like everyone, we had a lot more time at home, and my studio's in my house. It's sort of, I make do with the space that I've got. And it really forced me to think. It did a number of things. One, I actually took out a couple of months to experiment. Sometimes you can get on a bit of a treadmill going, I've got this idea, I'm going to keep going, make. Then I thought, actually, no, I'm going to stop. I'm just going to try some things. And I firstly took the time out to go, and actually, I just got loads of bits of thick board, and I just started painting using brushes, which I don't do too often. And it was actually quite good to do that. I went through my archives of photography, and I just thought, surely there's some bits in there maybe that I've tried to do before, haven't made work. So I started revisiting that. I went through everything actually, and picked out little things that I could do something with this. So that was quite good. But that took me so far. So then it was like a lot of my photography, and then the art I was creating was based off a lot of my travels, a lot of kind of West Coast US stuff, and a few other places. And of course I couldn't go anywhere, and my job situation was changing. So it kind of made me focus on London a bit more. So I kind of thought, well, this is the time to do this. So once there was a little bit of freedom, I kind of got up really early in the mornings and found myself in London, and just started taking photos and just walking a lot. And I just had the headspace to get my head around what I needed to do to try and get the essence of London that I wanted. So yeah, and that influenced a whole ton of work, which, I was putting out. It took a while to produce, but, creating last summer, in summer 2021, and putting out towards the end of last year and this year. So yeah, so it was good for the headspace,
Yeah, because I think a lot of artists, I think it actually helped a lot of artists, the time, because I think, we all get wrapped up in our day-to-day lives, and we don't always have the time to do the things we want to do. And, art takes time. It takes a while to create, and your work especially, because your work. So the thing I really like about your work is that it's not only just visually interesting, but like the fact that you use so many different medias is really fascinating because, it's a blending of digital and, traditional work. And I'm kind of actually just curious, like, what is your thoughts on kind of the debate between traditional art and digital art?
Yeah, I kind of feel this comes up a lot because I know a lot of digital artists who just do pure digital work. I use the digital element for planning and shaping, but not for the final execution. Yeah. It's a way of kind of trying to find out how things work. And I think I was going to say the industry, but not in the industry, the art world as a whole, I think they still frown upon pure digital work. I think there is a negativity associated to it. And I think the analog nature of art in people's minds, that's where the value comes.
Yeah, that's true.
I was talking to a gallerist last week about potentially working with them on some bespoke pieces. And they were telling me, and this echoes this, I don't know if this is a common feeling, but I was talking about my work. I was talking about the fact that as I've been with you, I take my own photos, I plan it out, I manipulate, but then I create, and it's all part of the stages. And they're super into collage work. I was really happy about that. But then they also said, and we just started talking about the old thing about price points. And I said, well, this is what I do. And I base this on size, the cost it take, the time, not so much the time, but the cost of materials and where I feel like I'm in my career, because pricing is always a tricky subject. And they were very much like, actually, yeah, we totally get that. And we think your pricing is good. That's great. But what they said to me was, we've been encouraging similar collage artists to you, or people who use collage as a medium, to become even more analog, introduce more paint, more brushstrokes, more, they even, made the example of canvases. And I was like, well, I don't really do canvases. I do my stuff on boards and thick paper or whatever. And they're just saying, actually, the perceived value of a piece of work which is classed maybe more as a painting is higher amongst their buyers. And it was a really that's one gallerist's opinion. And so then if you relate that back to the digital art, not digital art conundrum, it just kind of proves that I think that's the way that the art world thinks. And maybe that's how consumers think too.
I think that's actually a very, very, very good point, actually, because especially when you look at something like photography, just as a medium itself, where it's quite undervalued, but you look at paintings that are, photorealistic, for instance, but yet they'll have a higher price point.
Yeah.
But imagery-wise, they're the same thing. So actually, you have a really good point. I think maybe it's the tactile nature of art that really kind of determines its value.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it's because I think if people can see the textures, they can see the effort that's gone into it, and maybe they've got a perception of how someone created that just by looking at it. I think they feel, well, actually, that must have taken a lot of time and effort. Therefore, they respect that and value it more. And it kind of chimes with a bit of my thinking about like the future work I'm going to do. And it's how do I keep mixing it up and just trying to build my own, build value in my work. What's going to appeal to art buyers without compromising what I do. So yeah, it's a never-ending thing for me I think for a lot of people.
But I think that's actually a really good point. And actually, now you said that, I'm going to suggest that to a lot of people I know in terms of who create art, because I feel like a lot of people are very kind of, I don't know, they kind of like worry about like, is their work good? Is their work sellable? And it's like, I think that's not really what you should be focusing on. It should be like the way in which you sell it is how, so what's going to determine how people are going to perceive it is kind of what you're saying about it, is how you're perceiving it. And I guess like how important is context for you in your work in terms of like when you're posting your work online?
When you say context, what do you mean?
So like
specifically.
So for instance, like when you post an image on Instagram, obviously you have captions, you describe it, you talk about it.
Okay.
But if you were to post it, say on I don't know, I ran a website, or let's say somebody took it off your Instagram and posted it on their art blog, for instance, without any kind of description. Like,
Gotcha.
is that something that you like, or is that, is it important for people to understand what they're looking at?
Yeah, I think it is important. I mean, it'd be great if someone did share my work, so I'm absolutely fine with that. But what the things I've struggled with on, managing social media, other than the time, it's that there is a lot of it's a lot of detail that goes into the work that you can't really see. You can't perceive on that little small square, or whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever. You can't necessarily see the texture. So video helps by, doing close-up videos of all of these things. I think that really helps. But that's where the explanations come into place. So I always try and give a little bit of context, whether it's where the source photography was from and why I did what I did, but not too long, because I don't think people read that much, really.
Yeah.
But then I always try and have a little description of this artwork includes original photography, screen printing, silver foil, layered paints, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, because I think it's great to know, because, if I was just scrolling past that and that wasn't there, I wouldn't understand it. I wouldn't understand the amount of detail you've gone into and the amount of time you've taken to source different materials to create this piece of work. I'd be like, cool, it's just a painting, or cool, it's just collage, And I think that is a really good point in terms of, like, especially the materials you use. For somebody such as yourself who uses such a variety, it's definitely important to make people aware of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of explanation. It's almost, in some ways, it's a little bit of, you're showing off your skills a little bit as well.
I was just about to say, like, you must have a lot of different skills you can utilize at any point. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's been good. I mean, as we were saying previously, it's like I kind of pulled in all the bits, all the artistic things that I like doing, whether it's photography or graphic design or all the various print elements and that cut and paste nature. I'm doing the stuff I like, and it does mean it takes time, and I've had to fine tune, and I've had to learn how to do specific things well to be kind of good enough. And like anything, the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the easier it is. But it's taking the time to do those things well as well.
So do you actually have any, like, particular routines that you use to help you focus on your work?
Yeah, yes and no. And I think I've learned over the years, it's kind of like, because there's so many parts for me, it does start with the photography, and it's a lot of it's around the frame of mind that you're in at each stage. So for the beginning, if it's about original photography, yes, I might be out and about, but I might not be in the mood, and I might just miss things. But sometimes you can be in the right frame of mind and go, hey, this is great. Equally, if I'm doing something purposefully, so if I'm getting up early, I will have a coffee, and I know that will stimulate me. And I'm on a mission, and I will be focused, and I will take a lot of photos. I think I said, again, it's like sometimes it's the accidental photos which are the better ones. So it's keeping those minds open. In a way, I've noticed that, for example, on the very rare occasion, if I'm out for lunch somewhere and I'm out about and I've had a coffee and I may have had a little bit of alcohol, the freedom in the things that I see are very different, and I don't make a habit of it. Maybe I should. I might enjoy things more. But I take some, you see things that are a slightly different perspective. So I'm definitely a much more creative then. When it comes to then making, there's a lot of thinking that goes on. It's not something that you can just go, right, okay, what's in front of me right now. I'm thinking about, once I've got an image that I like, I know I can do something, my brain is in overdrive, and I have to build myself up to getting to the point where I'm going, now I'm mentally ready to make this. I know what I've got to do. At all of these stages, I have to go through that mental process. Otherwise, every time I don't do that, I just kind of waste time and I get frustrated. So I've got to invest myself in, really do, for each one.
So what I find actually really interesting is that if, like, the photograph is most usually the kind of starting point, Like, how do you know the photograph is good enough to create a piece of work around it?
Okay. So that's once I've taken the photo, then there is that point of taking it back home, looking through, feeling inspired by it. And there's a lot of sorting where I go maybes, yes, definitelys, and I just keep them filed. And then I just pick one, the one I feel most strongly about, and I will probably go into Photoshop and going, okay, I think this can work with this and this, and I've got this other image here, and I start putting stuff together. And again, that you have to be in a certain mindset to do that. You can't just go, oh, I've got a spare half an hour here, I'm going to do that. You got to go, no, I'm feeling good about this, and this has been on my mind. Let's go into the first stage. Let's see if I can make something out of this.
So when you actually go out and do a photo shoot, like what are you looking for? Or is the fact that or do you try not to look for anything?
I try not to look for everything. Sometimes if there's, I try and have a focus point, not to make the specific photo trips a waste of time. I'm like, I definitely need this. I definitely need this. And I've got ideas because either I've been there before or I've seen something somewhere and I go, I need to see that for real. Then it's like going, well, what else is around? What else can I do in the time that I've got? And then you just try and be tuned to your surroundings. And there's a little bit of, I suppose the word, like there's a little bit of bravery on my side, I suppose. It's kind of like, it's that balance of you don't want to waste time. You want to find the best possible things. I have this kind of, it's this kind of, sometimes I do find a reluctance to go, oh, okay, I'm just, I've done loads, I'm tired, but I'm here, I should keep going. And sometimes I find myself, I'm forcing myself, it doesn't look great, that thing, but I'm going to take a picture anyway. And I think it's those ones are the images that I end up using. It's weird. It's a hard thing to explain. It's an internal feeling where I'm just like, either you get a bit tired or a bit fed up, or, oh, I'm not sure it's going to work. And you kind of talk yourself out of it. And then I've got to kind of talk myself into it again and like literally raise my hands to take the photo. It's a very weird thing.
Out of curiosity, like how often do you show like that process or the part of the process where you kind of get from having an idea and going out and shooting the actual image? Do you ever actually show like the photo shoot process?
I used to do that occasionally on, like part of an Instagram story or whatever. And I try and do it. I don't know. I don't think those posts didn't necessarily do that well. But I know that it's funny that I've had a few of my friends and a few colleagues going that I'd be really interested to know, where did you start?
Yeah.
What was every single step?
I completely agree. I think that's so fascinating because your work can go in so many different directions. I would love to just kind of see like you do like a process of it. Okay. But actually what I'd love to see more than anything would be like, now I'm thinking about it, like some kind of almost, I don't know if it sounds weird or not, but almost like TV series, like deep dive into somebody's process where you have like, say maybe like, 7 or 8 half an hour sections of like each kind of a part of their process. Something like that would be really cool, actually. I should totally do something like that. Something like that would be really cool. Yeah, like, cool. Well, like say you have like a camera crew following around an artist from like their first initial idea to the final image, like the actual whole process. Something like that would be really interesting, I think, because I think somebody like you, I think, the final image is awesome. It's super cool and it's eye-catching, but it's actually a lot about the process. How you get to that final image is also where kind of like the enjoyment and the strangeness and the interest is. And I think sometimes that's lost if you just look at a final image.
No, it's true. And you know what? I did do a lot of making of videos for a while. And, it's easy to edit these things together. And I think people did enjoy them. I think what actually annoyed me after a while was I would often either forget to switch my phone camera on because I was like in the moment. Yeah. And there'd always be a lot of stop and starting. And I realized at some points I was actually spending more time just trying to sort out the filming
Yeah.
myself rather than actually doing the work.
That's why you need like an external person to come in and film you.
Yeah.
That way you can just get on with being in your natural state, and then it's literally just observational cameras. That's all it is.
Yeah, I think that would be definitely much more preferable. But I'm thinking now for the stuff I'm starting to do, the new stuff, or maybe for one of them, I could kind of make that effort to kind of go, okay, let's go right to the beginning and show the various steps. Maybe I could do it on a smaller piece and see how it goes.
But then I also think, having said that, I also feel like where you post it will be very important, because I feel like Instagram isn't really the place, because people aren't going to see it as much, or it's not going to get the right kind of exposure you want. Because I feel like even if it was like a Skillshare class or something like that, like something like that would be great.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. I guess what you wouldn't get is the hours of frustration and thinking, unless there was someone filming me literally racking my brains and being annoyed. Because actually, when you break it down into all the steps, you can go, oh, okay, that's cool. And you can compress it into like a 60-second video if you really wanted to, or a 2-minute video. And I wonder if that is a bit of an injustice to the pain that I've gone through to make it and the mistakes.
Like 100%, because I think that's the thing. Like on Instagram, especially, we see like 60-second videos of artists creating their work, and like that's cool, but it's cool to see the process, but we don't really get to see the hard work. And I think it kind of undervalues the amount of time and effort you're putting into it. It's like there's a really great collage artist whose work I really love, and I interviewed a while ago, called Jay Riggio, and he does like resin sculptures, collage resin sculptures, and like his speed edits are amazing, but it's taken him stupid amount of hours to create that, and it's like 10 hours in a 60-second video. It's like you don't really see how much work has really gone into it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I totally agree. But I don't know. I think there is for the right audience and at the right time. That's. I mean, it's good content either way, and as an artist, you're constantly having to sell yourself.
Oh yeah, of course.
You have to make yourself visible, and I think it's important. And I know that's something I need to improve on. But yeah,
I think something that everyone needs to improve on, really.
Yeah, it's hard. Some people, I think you can make it a habit. I know super shy people who they're just in the nicest possible way, they're churning this stuff out. Yeah, actually, in those little snapshots, it's all right. It's good. It's good. And I will watch it,
But then do you remember it though?
No, I just know that they do it.
Because that's really the issue, I guess. Now I'm thinking about that. The issue is that you don't remember stuff if it's going by quickly. Like we're all doing it to get like the views and stuff. But like, yeah, your stuff might have 1 million views, but how many people are going to remember that?
Yeah, no, people, again, everything is so temporary, right? And there's that whole thing of people don't remember phone numbers anymore. They don't remember facts anymore. Because they don't need to, because it's always in the palm of their hands. So, yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's scary.
So you said you work in a studio. So what is the atmosphere like when you're creating work?
My studio is a mixture of my garden shed, my garden, and my dining room.
That's great.
I'm planning a studio space. It's going to take a little bit longer financially to sort out, but I don't know. I think I have music playing, or when I get to my garden space, I'm just like, well, it's just me and I'm by myself, and I like it that way. I need to concentrate. When you're in the zone, I just don't. I'm there, and I've built as I said, I build myself up to it, and I need to be able to execute. So with my family, I'm just like, I'm doing this. I'm blocking these hours out. This is my time, not doing anything else, and it's fine now, mostly.
Mostly. So there are two artists I spoke to a while ago. One called Ellis King, and the other one called Mark Thompson. And actually, the last artist I interviewed previously is the last one. I've done 2 interviews this week. So the one I interviewed before last, we were talking about this idea of loneliness as an artist, because you're working in a studio all the time. Like, is that something you ever encounter, or like how do you kind of try to manage that if you do?
Yeah, I think I get it to a certain extent. I think there's many aspects of my life with the day job and the art thing. They're both very isolating. I'm at home by myself all the time, and I think it's often hard to reflect, and it's hard to bounce off ideas and get opinions. And I think that can be important, getting those opinions. If there's people around you, just like, not that, and if it's providing its opinions of people that you trust, then I think that can be super valuable. I really do. But equally, I can see, as I was saying, to be able to concentrate and to not have the distractions, it's better to work that way.
Of course, yeah. So then, do you feel like you're part of a larger art community?
In the town that I live, I know a small handful of artists and with one or two of us, we do. I mean, it's that small. There are other, it's a weird one because there is a lot of, in like Berkhamsted where I live, there is, there's different ranges of different art communities. There's the more hobbyists who want to sell. There's a small group of artists who want to be ambitious, build proper careers out of it. And I'm more towards, those people. We're all sharing ideas. We're all sharing tips. We share our frustrations. We share our experiences. And so in that respect, I feel part of a very small local art community. When I'm going out to the shows and I'm trying to get out a bit more to whether I'm exhibiting or trying to go to opening nights, that's when I feel more part of it. Because the more you do it, the more familiar faces you see. And I don't know, there's a sense of belonging, certainly when you're exhibiting at a big show. Most of the time, I would say most artists are super friendly. They're all desperate to talk and have a chat and share. Some, not all, but I would say 95% of the time, you meet some genuinely lovely people, and you realize you're all in it. You've all had the similar experiences, and everyone's willing to give advice about how they overcame something. So that's always good.
So then, kind of going off the idea of community, like, what are your thoughts on social media?
I think it's a super valuable way to get your art out there, to give the hope and perception that it's a way to reach your audience. I think there is the misconception that it's easy and it's your only means of outlet to advertise yourself. And because you're up against a giant corporation and their algorithms at the end of the day who want to make you spend money. I mean, that's just the way it is, and you have to accept that, and you're never going to get anything for free. So I think if you can work with it and accept that I think you have to work with it as part of your outgoing marketing strategy for sure, but you can't rely on it. You can't just rely on that. You won't get very far.
So how do you think that it could improve for artists, or how do you think artists can use social media in a more kind of productive way?
I think to understand the platforms and how they work is a big one, and keeping up to date with that. And it feels like you're beholden to them a little bit, them being the company, whoever owns Instagram, Meta, Facebook. And but I think you have to work with it, and you have to accept that there are rules that you have to abide by, and you have to work with the tools. It means you have to be a bit more digital savvy. I think there's a lot of people out there going, you shouldn't pay for anything on Instagram. You should just work with the algorithms and systems. I actually disagree with that. I think you need to do both. I think if you can find, because that's why these tools are there. They want to make it more effective for you to find your audience, to find people who like your work. So you have to work at targeting. You have to work at finding your audience. And I think you do have to spend a bit of money to do that. I'm in the process of doing this. I'm not sure about the result. I'm not saying it's the be all and end all. It's just a slice of your marketing activity. I think you've got to play by the rules. Otherwise, you're just not in that space.
That's really good advice, actually. And I think now you've said that, it makes me think the good thing about creating like Instagram ads is that it actually makes you think about your audience. It forces you to think about your audience and like who is your audience. Because a lot of the time people just create work and they don't actually think who they're creating work for. They're just hoping somebody's going to like it.
Yeah.
And like, how do you kind of figure out your audience if you do?
Yeah, no, it's a good one. So I've done test campaigns. I'm really trying to, you kind of think about the various subject matters that people search for and want to look for. That's how it's done. And you kind of group these together. And you do little small campaigns and you kind of hone it down. I would say I'm still on that journey there, because I think what you do end up finding is, for over 50% of the people that then end up seeing your work, they are other artists. They're not necessarily your buyers, your actual true audience of who's going to want to purchase your work. That's the harder thing, because they're the harder ones to find. But I would say I'm making steps towards that, but it's an ongoing journey.
That is perfect. So I have a question from the last artist that I spoke to, which was only a few days ago, actually. I was a photographer called Nico Evermore. His question for you was, how are the current events around the world influencing your work, and why is it affecting it in that way if they are?
Okay, good one. I'm going to say it doesn't actually affect my work that much. Not in a practical way, because I think my subject matter is very much, it's trying to take one step out of reality in some ways. At least that's what I like to think. And I'm trying to represent what's kind of real and happening, and these are objects. I'm not trying to make any kind of political statement or anything. But I would say on a more kind of psychological level, it does make me think about the value of art more, and the time I spend, the money I spend making this stuff, and how valuable is it when you consider what's going on in the world, and where potentially for the people who are struggling, art is, how important is them right now, and it's a kind of survival thing, and it kind of makes you think, well, am I being like, should I be doing more? I think on that level, perhaps. Not that art can't raise awareness, and I think there's so many great causes out there that you can contribute to. But yeah, that's how it affects me. It's like, how is me doing what I'm doing helping in any way? And I've got to be honest, it probably doesn't.
Yeah, I agree with that, but then I feel like not really, because it helps you, so therefore it just helps somebody. If it just helps you, that's not an issue, really.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, no, and it helps. I mean, it's for me, producing it's like for any any artist who produces work, I think you have to, you got to do it for yourself, really. About whether you could do it for yourself because you want to do it, and whether you want to do it in a commercial way or a non-commercial way, that's entirely up to you. Yeah.
So do you have a question for the next artist I interview?
I was suddenly thinking, God, I haven't actually done that. I think, all right, here's one. And it's kind of, this is something that actually would interest me, because I know what my motivations are as an artist, and whether it's an, for me, it's a little bit weird, but it's that whole, I'd like to be creative. I want to be successful at being creative, and I want to get recognition for that, because I know that makes me tick. So my question would be, why do you get up in the morning and want to make art? As in, and I mean that from a kind of, where's the drive? Where's the drive coming from internally? because I think it's quite if you really boil it down, it's quite an abstract thing that you're making art compared to your everyday having to do stuff. Where does that desire to create come from?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm really fascinated because you could choose to do anything with your life, but you chose to do art. Something that's so uncertain and so, kind of just might not matter to anybody. Like, but yet you're so passionate about it and you are so like fiercely wanting it as a career. Like, I agree. Like, I don't understand where does that come from.
And why do some people, I mean, we talked about this before as well, why do some people have it and other people don't? When I remember at school being told, actually it was my friends. I remember my friends at the time just going, because I was super into art. And they were like, well, what are you going to do if you're an artist? What are you going to do with that? What job are you going to get? What's your thing? And likewise, like careers advisors that you get at school, equally like, well, you'll never get to university. You can't do anything with it, like an art A level or whatever. I mean, this was the advice I was given. And I think it threw me off for a while, for sure. 100% threw me off for a while. And no one really knew what can you do. But then I think it's two things. Yeah, there's a million things you can do, but you have to have the desire. And I think that will equally prove to me that there's a lot of people not wired that way.
Yeah, that's actually really true. And actually, it segues nicely into the next question, which is, what does it mean to be a successful artist?
Oh, yeah. So for me, yeah, it's for one, to be recognized as an artist in the art community. I think that would be good. I think when people see the value in what you do and they love what you do, and you can see that they really love something, because you do spend a lot of time in doubt and self-denial. That's validation. And I think for me that's part of being a successful artist. And thirdly, I suppose it's the financial aspect too. If I want to make a living out of this, then financial success equals success to some point.
So then how do you measure the success of your own work?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Another good question. Firstly, on the execution, whether I'm happy with it, whether have I done the best out of, from when I had the vision to the final piece, have I given it the full justice? Did I go off on a tangent? Did I compromise? And it does happen on some pieces, and I try and work my way around that. Like, I'm trying to go, no, don't compromise. If it's going to take longer, it's going to take longer. Let's just make sure that you're happy. And I get more to satisfaction when I'm happy with the final piece, even if I've been through too long a journey. It's probably better to have gone through that. So that's some way of judging, have I had a successful process in creating this, and therefore the final piece is good. And then, is that echoed by people who view the work, people who decide to purchase the work? That is the final kind of reaffirmation that actually I liked it and people have liked it enough to spend money on it. And I've seen in the past, there'll be the ones where I kind of like, yeah, it's okay, it's kind of good enough, it'll do. Is that sentiment echoed by people who view the work? I would say 70% of the time, yes. There's definitely times where people have bought things where like, okay, that's cool, and was never my favorite, but I'm glad you love it. And they're the nice surprises where it's like sometimes you've been in a picture too long and you're like, oh, I'm just done, I'm stopping. But then someone goes, oh my God, that's my favorite thing. That's really satisfying.
That's really nice. It's nice to see how people engage and react to your work in the real life as well, especially. I think that's really important. I think sometimes I personally feel like a lot of artists, myself included, we rely on social media for reach, but actually being in the flesh with your work, engaging with the public, like that's probably the best way to understand how your work is seen.
Yeah. I think I would encourage, I've only really started doing that in the last couple of years, and obviously lockdown delayed that progress. But I think to put yourself in those environments and to hear that feedback, and I think it will give any artist some level of confidence to go, okay, what I'm doing is right. And it's that, and I think you need confidence to produce as well. You can't just do it from that place of self-doubt. You have to have some belief in what you're doing, and to hear that from other people, I think it's not hard. I think it's really important. I think it's really important whether you're dependent on the validation or not. It can only help, because when someone says they like something,
That's true.
Yeah, it's an ego thing, right? Let's be honest. It's going to make you feel good, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, obviously you must think it's good because you created it. You produced it. You actually took the time to display it. So you must think it has some kind of value to somebody.
Absolutely.
Somewhere. So
again, I had another piece of advice in the past, and I do think about this a lot. Actually, this comes up a lot in those difficult moments where the advice was kind of like, you're going to know as an artist, when you're producing something or when you finish something, you're going to know if you think it's good, and if you like it, and you will feel some kind of affinity to it because it's a part of you, and you're being authentic to yourself in producing that work. And so, but if you're producing something and you'll be like, it's all right, then you should ask yourself, well, is this good enough to actually go out there and show? Are you asking yourselves the right questions? Are you doing yourself justice? Are you doing the best that you can?
That's really good advice. And I feel like that's probably going to be like your intro line, probably. So 3 more questions. So does artistic freedom exist?
Yeah, I think a lot of the motivation of a lot of artists is to have that freedom, is to break through any of life's restrictions, molds, and it's an expressive medium, and I think inherently has an element of freedom to it. And I think it's up to the individual artist to narrow their, how can I put it, to go down a narrow path, or feel free enough to go, actually, I'm going to do something outrageous and weird. And I'll do that. I mean, weird is a weird word, because that can mean anything. That can mean different things to different people. But I think as an artist, you have to infer your own artistic merit onto something, whether it's the most abstract work, whether it's if a performance art piece or whatever way it could, if you can apply meaning to expressing yourself in some way, and you can explain that to someone in a way that they can understand, I think that's fine. And it's, beauty in the eye of is in the eye of the beholder. There's a little bit of that, and I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think you should have the freedom to create, and if it feels authentic to you as a creator, then that's fine. And you've got to be happy with the fact that not everyone's going to get it, but that's not necessarily the point.
Yeah. That's very true. So what would your younger self think about your work?
I think my younger self would like it, because I've pulled together all the things I've liked doing throughout my life and bringing that into my artwork. So I think my younger self would appreciate it, because I'm doing all the things my younger self would have liked to have done. So yeah, I think I'm good with that.
So the last question, double barrel question, which is, what are you currently working on, and where can people find more about you and your work?
Okay, I am working on a few things, and I've just finished some very small kind of postcard-sized pieces of basically laundrette tumble dryers, washing machines, tumble dryers. They're actually tumble dryers.
Yes.
And
Yes. I saw that post.
And it's something I had on my mind for ages. And I was like, okay, what can I do? I've got to do something with this. It's a bit weird. And normally it's not, I do the landscapes, and this is one of those. This is an object. And there was I'm part of ArtCan, which is a great organization, and they have this fundraiser every year where you create a postcard sized piece of work. And I was like, right, this is it. This is my way to do this. So I've made 10 of them. I gave one away to the fundraiser. That was actually last night. It sold before the fundraiser even started. So that was lovely. Wow. And so I made like another 9 or 10 of those in different colorways. So I'm going to frame them up and sell them. Wow. As a kind of low price point thing. I don't know. It's still got palm trees, so I figure it's fine. I've got 2 big pieces I'm working on, both London based. So these are kind of like 50 by 70 centimeter pieces. So they're relatively big for me in the last year. I'm hoping to show them later this year hopefully I can get into a couple of shows. That's my plan. I want to finish those this summer. I've got a couple of smaller pieces as well. Again, probably based on this country. I'm actually doing some traveling this summer for 3 weeks back in the US on the West Coast. And that's I'm going to be taking a lot of photos, and I've got ideas about what I'm going to create there. In my mind, I've already got a vision of the types of photos I want to create. So it's been a while. And as soon as I get back, once I finish the immediate work, I'll be working on that stuff to show probably spring next year. I try and plan. It takes time. I've got to plan ahead. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm doing right now. And I'm excited about the trip. I'm excited about just getting a whole fresh new load of source material. I've got a very good idea of how I'm going to execute it. I am pushing things on a little bit more. I am going to rely a little bit more on paint as well. And yeah, no, it's exciting. I think it's, and hopefully doing something for another gallery as well. If I can pull that off, that'll be really happy. That'll be good for me. So yeah, lots of bits.
That's really cool.
And you can see my work. I think the best place to see my work is, I do stories and post on Instagram on a regular basis. So Anil Mistry Art. My website is up to date, anilmistryart.com, with all the latest works for purchase. And I've got a newsletter. I'm not spammy with it. I probably do that 4 times a year, once every quarter. If a significant event is coming up, I will build it all together. And usually there I will show off work before it goes on any other social media. I do giveaways. I will do competitions. So sign up. Yeah.
That's cool. That's perfect. Well, Anil, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. I likewise. I'm glad to spend the time with you and to talk about this stuff.
That concludes my conversation with Anil Mistry. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com, or please get in touch via social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Fruit Bowl podcast can now be found on a variety of sites, such as Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. If you like the show, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of these platforms to help spread the word. Also, please check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration and written interviews. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. If you'd like to support the platform further, we now also have a Patreon page where tiers start from £1. For £1 a month, you can get rewards such as early access to interviews, behind the scenes footage, weekly curated YouTube videos, and the chance to ask interview questions on our next podcast. If monthly donations are not your thing, we also have our PayPal. The link to that should be in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this episode of The Flying Fruit Bowl today. And until next time, folks, please stay safe.